human spirit and is not something that inspires people. There's no magic to it. And certainly the bits that are fun are really just kind of sideshows, just sedatives and distractions. And so I think for a lot of people, one of the things that is becoming apparent now is that the promise of normality, which is if you work hard, you can reap the benefits and you can bring in your harvest a little later on in life, in your 50s or 60s or 70s, depending on what you do and where you are, that vision is beginning to fade for a lot of people now. And a lot of people, certainly in Britain and America, as two places I'm quite familiar with now, a lot of young people can credibly look into the future and say, I don't think I'll ever be able to retire in the same way that my grandfather would have done. I don't think that's actually going to happen now. And so the whole principle of working for one's future benefit is being called into question, however informed or uninformed someone is. And I think that's really interesting because it starts to expose some of the preposterousness and some of the fractures in this normality. And it makes people think, well, this doesn't work. It's broken. This system is not functioning properly. And at a very high level, you could say, well, strategically, all such systems have a finite lifetime, and then at the end of it, they have to reboot in some way. And the politically minded people, the activists, and those who have some sort of faith in the Constitution or the rules and regulations that govern a free society, people who think in that manner are put in a very challenging position then, because they have to say, well, is this brokenness reversible? You know, can we go to Parliament, go to Capitol Hill and actually start to work to make something better and more equitable? And I think if one is really hand on heart, truly looking at that question and answering it, if you're on the electric chair of truth, where a wrong answer gets you electrocuted and you have to give the real answer, the answer is no, that situation is not reversible. And so it makes people concerned, because I think there is what one might call a genetic memory to say there is some sort of cataclysmic element to this thing. There is an apocryphal or a catastrophic element that we feel on the horizon somewhat. And just on the heels of that, only in the same way that it would be a cataclysm for a flower at the approach of fall, and it would be somewhat worrying to see the first frosts and snows come for all kinds of plant and animal life. And so it is a seasonal thing. It is cyclical. And I think if one is philosophically and spiritually able just to shift out of concerns for oneself for a moment and shift up that energy ladder and just move out of the preservation instincts and just look at it for a moment from a more sort of balanced and selfless perspective, we could say, well, this is probably a good thing. This system is broken. It isn't equitably constructed. It isn't structured in such a way that the democracy is true. It's somewhat of a charade, really. And I think even the most optimistic and cynical politicians are aware of that in each distinct different viewpoint. I think that's understood. And the problem is, well, what do we have in absence of such a system? What else is there? What else do we have? And the myth that is put forth from certainly the UK government in recent times, with all the altercations and riots and strife that have been, splattered all over the newspapers and television, the UK government is saying, well, you either have our order or you have chaos. You either have this civility that is beamed to you from the turrets of government, or you have this Mad Max free-for-all looting, raping, pillaging madness. And I think that is a very false dichotomy. It's a very thin sliver of an idea. And again, when probed, it doesn't really hold water. It doesn't really stand up to the task. So for me, it brings one back to a very, very fundamental thing, which is that much of what we see on the outside is a very, very literal reflection of what's on the inside. And so there's a certain responsibility for the state of the earth and the state of human society and the population and on all its different maladies. There's a certain responsibility that we all share in that. And any sort of fanciful visions of government and freedom and liberty and this kind of political equanimity is nonsense, really. And I think everybody knows that deep inside. And yet, with a population globally of 7 billion, with all these broken systems in America and Europe and Britain and all the upheavals in the East and so on, and the blossoming of China, which is soon set to start to wither already, from what I can gather at the edges, we do face the prospect of saying, well, something's got to change here. And most people are not willing to accept that the change starts from the inside out, not the other way around. And I think that's when you start to have to address questions of philosophy, of mysticism, of spirituality, of phenomena in the world, and start to broaden one's thinking and deepen one's thinking to say, well, we can look at some other factors here. It's not just in the corridors of power. There's some things going on with the sun. If you map solar cycles against some of the activities that we've seen in the last 2 to 3 weeks, certainly in Britain, there's a very interesting correlation. And if you map planetary alignments, again, nothing new to your audience, but there's a very interesting correlation at the moment. And of course, all the talk of various Mayan calendar calculations and so on and so forth, all those things do have some relationship to what's going on. So the whole Hermetic principle, first, put forth in the Emerald Tablet of the micro and the macro being intimately related and indeed being really reflections of each other, not just symbolic, but very literal. That wisdom is now finding its way slowly but surely into the mainstream. And I think people are starting to understand that. Certainly in my travels over the last few months in particular, I've heard so many people, both in the mainstream and conscious and spiritual circles, all those different areas, so many people have said, goodness me, I am going through so much turmoil at the moment, domestically, in business, financially, emotionally. It's just crazy. And then, I look at the newspapers and it's just the same thing. And I think for the first time in my life, I'm starting to see more and more people start to click that there is a very, very significant connection between the two. And it's more magical than certainly the Unreality broadcast, the normal broadcast would have us think. It's far more magical than that. And of course, that kind of plays to my perceptions and philosophies and strengths, one would hope, in that more and more people are switching on to information, the kind of stuff that you broadcast, the kind of things that I talk about. More and more of a diverse audience is coming to this now and saying, religion in the mainstream isn't giving me any answers, so I have to go on this journey myself. And it's a classical journey, which more and more people are slowly beginning to arrive at, really through crisis more than anything else. So that's a long answer, but that's what I see.
It's quite a landscape to behold. One of the things I often think about in this reality reflection, the inner and the outer, the way that it manifests, the crisis that seems to bring us to revelation of some sort or another. Because it's always a revelation of some sort or another, whether you think it's a mystical one or just figuring out how the hell you're supposed to deal with mundane, everyday crap. But it forces us to deal with it.
It does, yeah. And I think we probably, it was perhaps you and I that touched on this last time we spoke, that there is this definite principle at work where if we ignore these small negative impulses, and there is this tendency in people to disown their spiritual path and to disown their authentic being. And sometimes those words might sound a little sanctimonious, but just to be an authentic man or woman, let's just put it like that. If we disown that in a kind of chronic manner, it seems that the universe won't let us get away with it. And so even in one's personal life, you find that, this single sort of ignored emotional impulse that's negative, or a physical impulse, or a mental abstraction, whatever it is, something that occurs that you think that's weird, and I know I should take a look at it, but I don't want to. People go through these 3 patterns of delaying this work, this inner work, and displacing it with other things, some good, some bad, but displacing it nevertheless. And I think what I see is that every time one does that, and we all do it from time to time, but somebody who is on a conscious path does it a lot less than someone who is operating in normality, shall we say. The more we disown those things and disavow that unfoldment, which is, to me, is a natural ascendant human thing, then the universe throws these issues back at you, and it puts them exactly the same as before. At the core of the issue, it's exactly the same, but it will be different scenery, maybe different people, different relationships, different textures and colours and so on. But also notably, each time it returns, it comes back a bit harder and a bit denser and a little bit more difficult to ignore. And so for the wise person, once they've been knocked over for the 5th time on the same issue, whatever that may be for us individually, and sometimes they're very intimate or very, very personal things, whatever that issue is, the wise person will look at it and go, you know what, I'm seeing a pattern here. This is the same thing I was trying to deal with 2 years ago, and I didn't really deal with it. I just walked away from it. I left the scene of the crime. So, you know what, I'm going to face this thing, and I'm going to face this fear, this pain, this suffering inside, and I'm gonna go with it. And whatever that is, an anxiety or a depression or a fear, whatever it is, a jealousy, it could be anything. That's what the wise move is. But increasingly, and certainly this is part of the Unreality broadcast, the normal world says, hey, that's life. Life sucks, basically. So what you do is just fill it with fun things and distractions. And so whether that for somebody is just sitting, eating a lot of pizza and drinking beer and watching old science fiction shows, and then for someone else it might be being a busy, grown-up business person in Manhattan working 15 hours a day every day. Those two things are equally displacement activities, equally disavowals of one's authentic path. And you can't get away with it. It certainly looks like you can sometimes when you see people who are apparently having a good time and not necessarily deserving it. But actually, again, probe a little bit deeper and you cannot get away with it. And so if you pan that out at the planetary level, we cannot get away with just ignoring the things that we all know we should be doing. And we can't get away with not having the courage and the strength and the liberated mentality to do something about our own life and to take control of it and design it and own it, to take responsibility for it. And just going to do the normal things, go to school and university and work hard and pay the bills and hope for the best, that seems like a quite amicable and responsible grown-up thing to do. But actually it isn't. It's actually a cop-out. It's an excuse. And I think when we look at what's happening in the world, these are the results of that. And for me, we're all responsible for that, everybody. Some, of course, more than others. But that intimate unfoldment of consciousness is directly related to the riots on the streets of London and Birmingham and Manchester and Bristol and so on in England. Those two things are very, very personal and very closely mapped, polarized perhaps, but very closely mapped